I'm Steve Wells.
And I'm Jeffrey Feldberg. Welcome to the Sell My Business podcast.
This podcast is brought to you by the Deep Wealth Experience. When it comes to your liquidity event or exit, do you know how to maximize the value of your business? You have one chance to get it right, and you better make it count. Most business owners believe that business value is determined during the liquidity event. Unfortunately, most business owners are wrong. Your enterprise value is a direct result of the depth and quality of your preparation. Who are we and how do we know? We're the 9-figure exit guys. We said no to a 7-figure offer based on 3 times EBITDA. 2 years later, we said yes to a 9-figure offer based on 13 times EBITDA. Despite having the same people, the same company, the same services, we increased our business value 10 times. How did we do this? We spent millions of dollars and years of time to uncover strategies that level the playing field. The end result is the 12-week Deep Wealth Experience. We've created a proprietary solution that is relentless, resilient, and gets results. Learn how to master the art and science of a liquidity event. We've leveraged the same strategies that took us from 7 figures to 9 figures. The Deep Wealth Experience levels the playing field so you can dominate and win. Book your free call today to find out if you have what it takes for the Deep Wealth Experience. Visit www.deepwealth.com/success to book your free call. That's www.deepwealth.com/success.
Welcome to episode 39 of the Sell My Business podcast. A.J. Wasserstein is the Eugene F. Williams Jr. Lecturer in the Practice of Management at the Yale School of Management. Additionally, A.J. is a private investor with a long-term orientation interested in lower middle market businesses and philanthropic organizations where he can be positively impactful by using his experiences, time, and capital. Mr. Wasserstein was the president of OneSource Water, the third largest bottleless water service in the U.S. OneSource Water was sold to WaterLogic, a UK-based strategic acquirer, in 2016. Previously, AJ was the founder and CEO of ArchivesOne, the third largest records management company in the U.S. ArchivesOne was sold to Iron Mountain after 17 years of operation. The U.S. Small Business Administration has recognized AJ as the Small Business Person of the Year in Connecticut. AJ wrote a book on young adulthood that was a gift to his 3 children. The book's title is What Matters Most: A Young Adult's Roadmap to Life. AJ, welcome to the podcast. We're really excited to have you with us today because you bring something that we've never talked about on this podcast before. We're going to talk about your exit and your success with that, and a huge congratulations. But you've done a deep dive into this paper that you wrote, this incredible case study, What's Next? The Entrepreneur's Epilogue and the Paradox of Success. And you focused in on something that every single business owner goes through with life after the exit. But I know, speaking for myself anyways, I never had that kind of heads up, which would have helped me tremendously. But one thing at a time, welcome to the show. Why don't you start with an overview of what led you to your exit and how that went for you?
Sure. First, Jeffrey, thank you so much for the invitation to visit with you and Steven. It's incredibly kind and gracious of you. Appreciate the opportunity. So I started a business immediately after I got my MBA when I was approximately 24 years old. I ran that business for 17 years and we grew substantially during that holding period and absolutely loved it. I could not have been having more fun being an entrepreneur and a CEO and running a business. It was really exhilarating. Somewhere along the way, I raised some institutional capital to continue our growth plans, and we needed some external financing to increase the rate at which we were growing. We had some outside investors, so private equity firms and great folks, and we had them as shareholders for approximately 9 years. What catalyzed our path towards an exit was we had an unsolicited, unprompted knock on the door from a potential acquirer that said, hey, we might be interested in buying your business. And at that point, the private equity firm had been in for 9 years, which in private equity years is a very long time. And the private equity firm said, hey, I got a great idea. Why don't we just hire an investment banker and test the market and see what happens? And I now joke that a private equity firm hiring an investment banker to test the market is like going window shopping for a ring with your girlfriend. And if you're window shopping for a ring with your girlfriend,
how true.
you're engaged and you might as well be booking the church. It's hard to put that genie back in the bottle. So we hired an investment banker and they were absolutely fantastic. And we tested the market and went through a very structured process with multiple rounds of bids and auction, blah, blah, blah. The truth is, once the numbers came back, it was really compelling for everybody involved. The private equity firm was looking for liquidity at that point. And from a personal perspective, it gave me financial security for my life and my kids' lives and grandkids' lives. It was a hard opportunity to pass up. So that's what catalyzed the exit process and how we landed where we landed.
AJ, Steve here. At Deep Wealth, we talk a lot about an auction and how powerful that can be to increase the value for the exit. And we also talk about the dangers of looking at someone knocking on your door and accepting that first offer. So in your situation, what happened? You had someone knock on your door. Did they end up staying in the process, going through the process? How did that look? And would you think that they were offering the best deal had you not had an auction?
I don't think we thought that they were offering the best deal. It just made us scratch our heads when someone knocked on the door. They stayed in the process. I'm not sure they made it to the later innings, but they were in the process clearly. Yeah, I think they just catalyzed us and made us realize, hey, we're in a pretty frothy market and maybe it would be worth testing the waters and seeing what the world looked like. And that's when we engaged professional support through an investment bank, which was fantastic. And they really ran a machine-like process.
You're one of the few in the sense that most business owners, they get an unsolicited offer. The prospective buyer knows, hey, I'm going to flash all this money in front of you. And most business owners, they see the dollar signs and they're thinking, well, why not? I don't have to pay any commissions. I have someone right at the doorstep. I don't have to go through all the different steps. Let's just go with it. And it looks like some good dollars. And hey, I hit a grand slam to the rest of the world, even though they left untold millions of dollars on the table. And interestingly, in your story, it's not just theory here. It was the prospective buyer did stay in the process, but ultimately wasn't the buyer who ended up purchasing your company through the liquidity event. So many lessons that come out of that. For our community, as you look back to your exit now, and you've had time to think about this, and you've had reflections, and you've been on doing other things, which we'll talk about. But as you look back to your liquidity event, what 2 or 3 things would you have done differently or even not at all? Or maybe there aren't any, but if there are, what would those be?
What would I have done differently? So I would start by saying I absolutely loved what I was doing. So it wasn't like I was burnt out. I was only 40 years old when I exited the business. So it wasn't like I didn't have a lot of energy and enthusiasm. I felt like we were at the top of our game. I was having a ton of fun. I could not wait for every day to start. Look, we took on institutional capital and they were a wonderful partner, but I wish there was a structure or way we could have run the business longer. I think we could have created a lot more wealth and I was having a ton of fun. So I'm not sure that's really possible, but if there was a way to either delay the exit or prevent it for a bunch of years, that would have been appealing to me. What else would I have done differently? We hired a great investment bank. They were fantastic. I feel like the support system and professional advisors we had were wonderful. The company that wound up buying our business was the largest player in the industry, and we were the 3rd largest player at that time in the industry in the United States. And I developed a business friendship with the executive team of the acquiring company over years and years. And at least once or twice a year, I would make a pilgrimage to Boston, Massachusetts, where this dominant industry player was located. And I'd have lunch with the CEO or CFO. And obviously, we were competitors. So it wasn't like we were buddies, but we talked about industry, we talked about concerns, we talked about opportunities, we got to know each other. And they wound up being the prevailing offer in our auction process. We had to go through Hart-Scott-Rodino. They had to do some diligence. And I don't even remember how long the diligence window was, but 30 days, 60 days. Somewhere like halfway through the diligence, I called the CFO of this company that wound up buying us and said, John, we're halfway through the diligence window. Aren't you going to actually do some diligence? And what exactly are you going to do? Because I got a red circle around a date on my calendar when I think we're closing. What exactly do you have to do? And he replied by saying, AJ, we've been diligencing you for about 15 years. We're ready to close whenever you want. So I share that because even when you go through a successful auction process and you think you have the most attractive number you could possibly have, there are still a lot of miles between that verbal signaling and the wire hitting. And diligence can derail a whole bunch of deals. And planting the seeds with the most likely potential buyers years and years in advance might serve an entrepreneur when they're actually going through the exit process and diligence. So that was just like really de-stressing to me when I heard, oh, we're ready to wire whenever you're ready. That was a great feeling.
AJ, it's interesting. Two valiant points come out of what you just shared. And firstly, I know a lot of business owners are, let me just get some money into the company. I can grow it quicker and I'll do all kinds of wonderful things, and don't necessarily look down the road at what that meant. Not to put words in your mouth, what I'm hearing you say is, left up to you, perhaps you wouldn't have had that liquidity event at that point in time, and perhaps you would have kept on running the company. But because it wasn't just you, and you're an astute businessman, and you had partners, and everyone has to get along, and we have to make sure that we're living up to our responsibilities, that really wasn't an option at that time. And words to the wise, to the community out there, there's always two sides to a coin for every situation. And it's sometimes you don't have a choice and you need to move forward in a different direction. And that's just the way it is, but at least go in eyes wide open. And the second thing that stood out, and in the 9-step roadmap in the Deep Wealth Experience, module number 2, we talk about know your buyer better than you know yourself. And we always like to say, never assume that it's going to be your competition who's going to buy you. Now, in your case, it was. Yep. And I'd like to share with the community that's not always the case. And oftentimes it's not usually the case. But the one smart thing that you did and really worked to your advantage, and I love your story, is you made a point to reach out to people in the industry or competitors and just talk with them and have them get to know you, because you nailed it on a key point, not just in mergers and acquisitions, but both in business and in life. Money's not the currency, it's trust. And over the years, you built up trust with your future acquirer that just paid itself off in spades later on. So that's terrific.
So Jeffrey, just to amplify a little bit, I learned a ton from this large competitor. They were incredibly gracious and kind to me and generous with knowledge and teaching. And they were a public company, so there was lots of public information. And I'm not naive to think they told me anything that was proprietary, but they wanted good participants in the industry, and they were kind to help me understand how they were thinking and different dynamics in the industry. I would like to think we paid that forward in the industry also, where we helped other people in the industry. And look, a dynamic, healthy industry where lots of participants thrive is better for everybody. That was really neat. And I just want to be clear, I don't regret raising institutional capital. The private equity firm who was a shareholder in my business, they were a fantastic partner. And I have to be completely honest and objective. I would not have wound up where I did without their participation and support and guidance and relationship. I wish we could have played for another 5 or 10 years. Yeah, I do. but that's not the way the game works. So I just want to be clear. There was no regret. It was just, can the game go on just a little bit more? It's all good.
I'm curious, and you may not have much to say about this, but selecting the team is critical for most transactions. And it sounds like you had a great experience and a great team. How did that come about? How did you find your investment banker and the other team players?
So great example. The investment bank we worked with was R.W. Baird. They're based both in Milwaukee and Chicago in the Midwest. And they were an absolutely great partner for us. So I'll give a shout out to Chris Hildreth, Peter Kais. They were our lead bankers, Les Cheek. They were the perfect size for us. So they weren't mammoth where we didn't matter, and they weren't boutique and too small where we were way over their heads. It was just a great relationship. They had inroads into tons of financial buyers who did not wind up being our market, but they were great people to talk to. And they also had inroads into tons of strategic buyers. And they just ran a masterful process to make our business the best positioned and most desirable it could be. Yeah, they just did a great job. Now, that being said, I think a tip I would give to potential entrepreneurs is figure out how you could be the best client ever for your investment bank. You want to be the easiest client. You want to be the first phone call that they return, and you want them to be excited about your deal and project. I'm still friendly with all those guys. They've been helpful in other parts of my life, and I would recommend working with them unequivocally for any entrepreneur that was thinking about an exit. I got introduced to R.W. Baird through our private equity firm. So we ran a beauty contest where we interviewed half a dozen investment banks, and Baird was definitely the right fit on a lot of different levels. One more tip I would make about investment banks and relationships and negotiations with investment banks: be generous with fees. So you want your investment banker working as hard as you can and fighting for that next marginal dollar. And being parsimonious with banking fees is short-sighted and foolish for the entrepreneur. You want them to be thrilled with their opportunity and constantly feel like they're working for one more tick and not take a low-risk, high-probability outcome because there's not value for going for the bigger outcome. So lawyer, we worked with a guy by the name of Alex Temmel, based in Boston. He's fantastic. Sometimes lawyers can be deal inhibitors. So they're great at figuring out why a deal shouldn't get done or all the problems in a deal. And of course, you need your lawyer and counsel to think like that. But you also want a legal partner who works on overcoming the obstacles and getting the deal to the finish line. So not a person that sees landmines and throws up his hands or her hands, but sees landmines and figures out how to go around them or go over them and is a collaborator, not an inhibitor.
AJ, lots of nuggets in there. Let me circle back on one of the comments that you make, and you're really preaching to the choir. It's a page out of the Deep Wealth book as well. But from your perspective, what can someone do to become the best client ever for an investment banker? What did you do to have that happen?
Selling a business is an extraordinarily invasive process. It's really time consuming. But when the investment bank asks you for data, and then they're going to ask you for data spliced a different way, give it to them. You got to be on top of every request that they make. And all the requests aren't going to be logical or in the time sequence that you want. But unfortunately, it's this crunch period in your life, and hopefully will give you financial independence and security. And you have to do backflips when they ask for information. You have to be accurate. You have to be precise. You have to be available. So when they want to talk or they want to get you in front of someone, the answer is yes. When you're in front of someone, you got to be on. You have to be 10x enthusiasm and really tell the story in the most dynamic way possible. Our investment bank was kind. They coached us on presentation skills and telling the story and giving enough information, but not drowning the listener in information, but being the best client you could be and taking their input and advice. They do it every day. So they're the experts, not me. They're the experts, and really listening to their guidance on how best to deliver the story. The other thing, Jeffrey, is we really took ownership of I'll call it the book, the private placement memorandum, the confidential information memorandum, the offering memorandum, whatever you want to call it. I call it the book. The bank wrote it, and I'd like to think we gave them lots of rich data. But when we got a draft of the book, we did not accept it. We ruthlessly edited the book as if it was our autobiography, me, my COO, my CFO. And I asked a private equity firm to do it as well. I'm not sure they leaned in fully. This is your big one at bat. And as much as I loved our partners at Baird, I wasn't fully delegating that book process to them. We really leaned in to make sure it was accurate and as compelling as possible. So I think those are some of the tips to be the best client possible. Don't push back when they're minor negotiating items. Make sure you're focused on the big items, but not the little items.
Before we move on, because we want to talk about after the exit, and you've written some interesting material on that. Is there anything else about the actual exit process in incorporating your team or your clients, or anything that you'd want to share that would be a great help to people thinking about going through this?
Yeah, we had a really small and tight circle of executives in the company that knew about it. So this is jarring. So it's not something we wanted to share openly with all of our team members because a deal could go sideways. It's really important if those key executives have not previously been incentivized towards a good outcome, either with stock grants or stock options, there's got to be a financial carrot for those key executives to make sure they're fully on board with what's going on and they're all in. The only other thing, which is squishy, Stephen, is enjoy the moment. It's like your victory lap and your bow after the performance. It's sort of a special moment to tell your accomplishments and stories to a whole bunch of really smart, successful, sophisticated people. And it's very validating. There are a lot of mixed emotions, but we'll get to that. But there's also this sense of enjoy this special moment in the sun.
In our 9-step roadmap at Deep Wealth, and through the Deep Wealth experience, one of the things that you're really highlighting the importance of, and it sounds like this was woven in from start to finish for you, we call it the winning mindset. That's step number 4 of the 9-step roadmap. And so from enjoying the moment, becoming the best ever client of an investment banker, doing cartwheels and flips when you're asked for things just to make sure that you're ready and you're there from a timing perspective, always being on. It sounds like you just zoned right in. Hey, we got to have the right mindset. It's going to help us. It's going to help everyone involved. It's going to get us across the finish line. And so congratulations with that. And it's something that we can't stress enough to the community that it costs no more, both time and money, for the right mindset, the positive mindset, than the wrong mindset or a negative one. So now let's start to dial in on what you've been working on now. And you had the exit, and you have some really interesting observations. And I know for myself, when you shared them with me offline, it resonated. And like I said, most business owners feel this. No one really talks a lot about that. So you had your exit, and what happened next?
So it's really fascinating. The first thing that happens, and this is totally autobiographical. I'm not saying I'm a proxy for everybody. This is just my story, although it's been confirmed by many entrepreneurs I connect with. The first thing that happens is there's a sense of relief. So you're running 100 miles an hour for decades, and then you're running 200 miles an hour for that last mile sprint to get across the finish line. So there's this sense of just breathing and release and relief. One of my friends described it as you took the yoke off your back. The wire hits, there's this just complete decompression coupled with this elation. Like this is your Super Bowl, World Series, New Year's Eve, all wrapped into one. So there's this real high that's a validation. And then there's this weird malaise and darkness that sets in, realizing that your baby's gone. This thing you loved and nurtured and cared for is gone. Your social interaction with professional colleagues very quickly attenuates. It's just this really weird moment of going 100 miles an hour to going to zero. And it can be filled with bizarrely loneliness and isolation after the exit. And Jeffrey and Stephen, my story was we sold the business. I stuck around for 60 days, 90 days, and that was it. So it wasn't like I was still working at the company that acquired us. It was a full separation after the 90-day bridge. Took my photos out of the office and that was it. Went home. And that was a really weird moment because life goes on for everybody else and your family, your kids, your spouse, all the people in the company stuck around. So they all changed uniforms, was working for a new owner, a new company, trying to fit in and work their way. And my life was very different, just complete sadness, a malaise, a loss, a mourning. And the truth is, I was incredibly confused. I didn't know how to process what I was feeling. I felt very alone. My wife worked, so she got up every day, went to work. The kids went to school every day. And I was alone in the house and trying to figure out things. And that was hard. And I think what's so tricky about it is we get sold the story and narrative, both in business schools and in popular media, that be an entrepreneur, it's great, which it is, and build a business. And if you exit the business successfully, you live life happily ever after. And I was sort of waiting for my happily ever after, and it wasn't coming. And I just didn't know. I thought there was something wrong with me. I didn't know what to think. And everyone else is so happy for you. I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody about what was going on in my head.
AJ, Jeffrey and I can say we have experienced many, if not all, the same feelings going through our exit and looking at that. So now that you've gone through that, what could you have done, or could you have done anything to help you in that transition that would have made it better or easier now that you know what it's like on the other side?
I'm not sure I'm an expert, despite having written about this. And I don't think, Jeffrey, we got out there yet. My role now in life is I'm a faculty member at the Yale School of Management. I teach courses in entrepreneurship, which is a wonderful encore career. What do I wish I knew, Stephen? I wish I knew this. For one, I wish someone told me while I was running a business that selling a business is an emotional roller coaster. Just eyes wide open. I'm not saying it would have made it better, but just cognizance. So I have 3 kids. My youngest is a freshman in high school, so we're on the cusp of empty nest. I know empty nest is going to be hard. It doesn't mean it won't be hard because my awareness, but I'm emotionally prepared. I was not prepared to deal with the emotions of selling a business. At the most simplistic level, Stephen, I wish I knew that it's not all good, that there's this underbelly to success. There's this epilogue and paradox of what's going on after you sell the business.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I'm not going to put words in your mouth. For me, my identity was so wrapped up in the business. And I think that's it's good, but some of it is unhealthy if that's really not who I am. And then after you've got this huge exit and all this money, then you're an expert in some people's eyes and you're a fool before, but you're the same person. So I find that interesting.
I think the 3 things that get disrupted in your life are structure, meaning, and identity. So when you have structure, you wake up in the morning and you work out, you drop your kids off at school, you go to the office, you say hello to everybody, you settle into your day and routine, or once a week you have the executive team lunch, and once a quarter it's the leadership team gathering, and the quarterly board meetings and the industry conference and the investor dialogue. There's this rhythm and pattern to your day, week, month, and year when you're an entrepreneur and a CEO, and it's very comfortable. It's very gratifying to know that every Friday we have our executive team lunch, and every Monday I meet with my COO for 30 minutes to kick off the week. There's a structure that gives you rhythm. You also have meaning. So you wake up every day and you're building, you're trying to serve customers, you care about team members, you interact with vendors and the banker. You're building this living, breathing organism, and you have purpose. You want to grow X% this year. You want to be the best in the market. You want to attract the best new hire. There's all this purpose and meaning to your life and the day. And you also have this identity. You're an entrepreneur, you're a CEO, you work at ABC company, you're in the XYZ industry. There's all these things that give you this very satisfying, comfortable existence. And Stephen, the question I dreaded most after selling my business is, what do you do? And that's such a common question in our society. It's not impolite if you're at a barbecue or a cocktail party for someone to say, what do you do? And I could not answer it well at all. You're retired, then they think you're unemployed or not employable. I just sold my business. Oh, you're a jerk. You're bragging. I'm an investor. Are you a gambler? No answer felt right. And you lose all that identity. And I remember once one of my kids said to me, Dad, what do? You just hang around the kitchen all day. And it's very humbling.
As business owners, we're at the pinnacle of success that the vast majority of the population dreams about. We're there, we're living it. There's no pity party of, oh, look at this, look at this business owner who just sold for untold how many millions. Oh, that poor business owner. Look at what they're not doing and how they feel bad. I think as men, we tend to hold things in a little bit more and sharing our feelings. And this is crossing onto the softer side of things, that it may not be natural territory for men in particular to express these feelings. And your friends are having a life, they're working, they're having their career, and no one wants to come and play with you in the playground because they're busy.
Yeah, there's no one to play with. Where I live, it's asynchronous and atypical for a 40-year-old person not to work. And no one knows how to process that, or I didn't know how to process it. So that's very atypical. Part of the compounding conundrum for a post-exit entrepreneur, which we call PEXIs, post-exit entrepreneur, in this case note, is when it happens at a disproportionately young age, it's so much harder. So if you sell your business and you're 65 or 75, there are probably other peers in your cohort who are going through similar life changes or retirements. But if you're 35 or 40 or 50 even, that's very asynchronous and atypical.
Now, AJ, in your case note, and I know you call it a note, and everyone should absolutely read this. We'll have a link to it in the show notes. It's a little bit more than a note, but it's well worth reading. Now, you have the What's Next framework, which I thought was very thoughtful and insightful. And you start from 6 months to 24 months after the exit. There's 4 areas in the What's Next framework. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, of the process that we should be thinking through even before we exit? We know maybe there's a liquidity event a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years, whatever the case may be. What's the What's Next framework, the 4 different stages that we should be considering?
Sure. So academics like to come up with pithy acronyms, and the What's Next framework is PROT. I'm not sure it rolls off your tongue, but it's got a couple of consonants and 1 vowel, so it could be a word. And it's a shorthand for pause, reflect, operationalize, and think. And those are the 3 stages I think that PEXIs, post-exit entrepreneurs, need to work through to get to their new place. And it's an iterative process, so I'll just highlight them at a high level. So pause. And this is something I failed to do, Stephen. So when I was in my malaise and wandering darkness, I thought the answer was do something. I'm a doer. I like doing things. So I immediately tried to figure out what my what's next was. And I think the very best thing to do after a exit is nothing. And this is extraordinarily difficult for type A entrepreneurs that are doers and builders. Stillness is hard. But the very, very best thing to do is go through a process of mourning, go through a process of emotional decompression. Just be still and resist the temptation to make investments, buy cars, buy houses, start businesses. Just do nothing. Walk, hike, chill, pick your kids up at school, drop them off at school. Just be and really let go. And everyone's different, but depending on the size of your exit, I could easily paint a picture that you need to do that for 6, 12, 18, or 24 months. Just let go. And I think during that window, you want to seek solitude. You very much want to be alone and just let your mind wander. Just decompress. I spoke to one post-exit entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. So after he exited, he told me he went on a pilgrimage in Europe. He, just walked alone and really let your emotions process and let the mourning and letting go settle in, but seeking solitude. I think it's also really worthwhile to connect with mentors and coaches, preferably life mentors and coaches, although a paid coach is not bad or a therapist is not bad. Those would be excellent, but really connect with people who have seen you over long periods of time. Friends, parents, faculty members, neighbors, but people who can just listen, people who might be able to offer perspective, people who can let you emote. I think the single most important thing in the pause is to define, if you previously haven't, or reaffirm your values. So you're about to engage on this next chapter and journey, and unless you have a compass and roadmap, you don't know where you're going. So, Stephen, if you only define yourself as an entrepreneur, if that's your only measure, your only identity, and you're not a friend, a parent, a spouse, a community member, the range of possibilities becomes really narrow. So what matters most to you and why is going to be really helpful as you move forward. And that's the screen and compass that I think is ultimately going to ground you and help you figure out the what's next. Reflect. I think after you let go, you get across the first bridge, you need to begin to contemplate what's next and what the choices are. The one piece of advice I would give in this chapter is open up the aperture. Don't revert too quickly. So the most common thing post-exit entrepreneurs do is do it again. They were good at it. It was comfortable. It had structure, meaning, identity. Like it was all easy. And they say, let me go do that again. So pause. Think about all the things you could do. All the things you could do that are comfortable and uncomfortable. So maybe it's volunteer work, maybe it's being a recreationalist, so doing things that are more pleasure seeking, but all the different things you could do. A mentor of mine, after he sold his business, went to divinity school, not to become a practicing religious leader, but really as a way to reorient. But this is the moment to engage in one of the exercises we propose is the 100-year exercise. So what do you want your story to be when you're 100 years old? So if you've been given this incredible gift of no financial limitations, some time freedom, depending on where your kids are and your spouse is, but you still have this blank piece of paper and you get to write your story. So what do you want your story to be when you're 100 years old? Now, that's really intimidating. But going through that process and defining what you want your eulogy to be, what you want your end story to be, gives you purpose and intentionality and increases the probability that you'll be doing the things you want to do as compared to slipping into or reverting to something unintentionally. So the other exercise in this reflection mode is what I call the what's next matrix. I'm going to be a little geeky here. I apologize. But on the y-axis, write down all the things that you either want to do or don't want to do. I want to travel for personal reasons, but I don't want to travel for work. I like being a leader, but I don't want employees. I don't want P&L responsibility, but I want purpose and meaning. I want a rhythm to my day, but I want freedom with my time. So however wacky and contradictory the things you seek in your life, write down on the y-axis. And I'll give all the listeners a hint. Y is the axis that goes up and down. And on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, write down all the potential next chapter journeys and paths you could take. So easily be an entrepreneur again, be a hired CEO, be an investor, be a professional volunteer, be a professional board person. On my list was be a ski instructor, be a teacher, be a professional speaker, be a recreationalist, but no dumb ideas at all. And then score the Y versus the X and try to bring some objectivity and quantitative analysis to which pathway might be the most fulfilling. I love skiing, but it turned out when I did this, I don't think I'd be happy being a ski instructor. I think it'd be really fun for a month, but I think being a ski instructor wouldn't be intellectually engaging and challenging. It wouldn't give me a sense of purpose and leadership in some ways. Try to do that objectively. So let me touch on operationalize. This is the moment when I think you begin to do trial probes. And whatever pathway you choose going forward, I strongly recommend that you do it in a way that you could escape easily. So if you want to go on a board, say, hey, I'm so flattered you'd like me to be on your board. Why don't we do a 6-month trial run? And I'll see how I feel after the 6 months. And you can see how you feel after the 6 months rather than locking in forever. Same thing with being a CEO or starting a business. Seek an escape valve if possible. I think in the operationalize, you really need to begin to think about wealth management. I do not think what's next is about wealth management, but you do have a responsibility to steward the wealth that you got. And I will say that being a wealth manager is extraordinarily different than being a wealth creator. And that's a hole many people trip in. And then finally, I think in the operationalize for me, I wanted to really wrestle with, do I want my life to be more about gathering or do I want my life to be more about serving? In all honesty, being an entrepreneur in many ways was about me. It was about my ego accumulating wealth and being the center of a lot of things, which was wonderful fun. But I really contemplated the next chapter potentially being more about others and serving. And then finally, the think chapter, Jeffrey and Stephen, is just really checking in. So you established your values, you have this freedom and flexibility, periodically checking in and making sure you're happy, you're fulfilled, you're where you want to be. And if you have this incredible gift and luxury of crafting your own story in life, making sure that you don't settle. And in that thinking phase, if you're dissatisfied, figuring out how to pivot. And if you're satisfied, figuring out how you hold on.
You've hit it on the head, the nail again, that metaphor. And we have been through that. And it's interesting to me, you put a little bit of a timeline, and I look at my life, some of these things have taken years, and your timeline was much shorter. And I should have been. I went down some bad, not bad in a bad sense, but slowly I discovered some of these. But tell me a little bit about the timing of this.
Much longer than people think. In the case note, I trimmed back some of the timelines because when you talk about years and years, it's too overwhelming to a reader or a post-exit entrepreneur. But I think the letting go process can take years. I think the reflection process can take years also. Operationalizing, I think, is a series of fits and starts. I think it's rare that people gracefully move from one chapter to the next. And the thinking component is perpetual. But you could easily paint a picture that this is 5 years or longer.
For our listeners, I really encourage you to look at the case note. But in the case note, there's something called figure 4, which is pre-exit and post-exit time allocations. You're out there and you're cranking, and it's a pie chart. And 80% of the time is professional. And I think we could probably say maybe it could even be higher for some business owners that are listening here. Just the other day, we had a guest on the podcast, and he said something interesting. And he said, I focused so much of my early years on the business that I really put my family relations to the side. And now that I'm getting up there in years, I've circled back, and he said, this is really the one regret that I have for my entire career. And so what's interesting, and why I bring that up, is if you look at the pre-exit and the post-exit, some areas which have 0%, or they might as well be 0%, things like spiritual or health or white space don't exist in the pre-exit or are minimal. When you get to the post-exit, they could be anywhere from 10 to 20% of your time. And so if you haven't developed that ahead of time, and now wham, you've had your exit, you're out of the company, you're no longer there day to day, that's a tough thing to do. And I speak from personal experience because I've walked that path, and it's not a comfortable one. So talk to us about your own experience and what you're seeing out there speaking to business owners.
Sure. These are illustrative pie charts in the case note, but the pre-exit one was probably pretty indicative for me. The vast majority of my time and mind share was going to the business. I'd like to think I wasn't a bad dad or a bad spouse, but I was a full-on entrepreneur. And if I was at one of my kids' soccer games, there's a high probability I was on the phone. And that's not something I'm proud of. That's bad. But I think when you're in post-exit, you have this luxury of creating your pie chart and where you want to allocate time to. And look, I was talking to someone a day or two ago, and the person asked me what I do with my time now. And he was so prodding because in his ears, it didn't feel like I was full-time. And I'm not. I want at least 30% of my time to be what I call white space. I want to be flexible. I want to have the mind share and time when my kids ask me to go for a hike or play a game or do anything. The answer is yes. I don't want to be overcommitted. I want to be undercommitted. I want to have time for my health. I want to have time for my awesome wife of 27 years. Yeah, I think you just need to prioritize and make sure that post-exit time pie chart doesn't get sucked back into one professional commitment. It's not where I want to be, but everyone gets to make their own choices, Jeffrey. I'm not saying what's right or wrong.
Again, great advice. And I really would encourage people to read the paper and think about it. And I think it's really good advice. I don't know if the entrepreneurs listen because they're so busy and they're working so hard, but they need to listen. But when you're going through the exit, this process takes a long time. But the more you are prepared, knowing there's going to be a transition, like you said, and the more that you are identifying what your core values are and what is important, and not try to do it in the middle of the battle because it's going to be more confusing, and go through that effort, I think is really valuable advice.
Circling back to what Steve was saying just now, you've done a brilliant job in one of the diagrams. You call it archetypes, and you have 5 different archetypes. And again, please take a look at AJ's case note. I can't stress that enough for the benefit for those that are listening. AJ's put this into, you have the do-it-againer, the discoverer, the recreationalist, the investor, and the philanthropist. And it's not that there's a right or a wrong with any of those. It's helpful, though, to know deliberately and intentfully, hey, this really resonates with me. I'm going to go in this direction. And AJ, it would be terrific to have your insights on the archetypes and what you can share about that with our community.
I don't think these are the only archetypes, Jeffrey, but these are very popular ones where there's the do-it-againer. I want to be a CEO again. I want to be an entrepreneur again. The discoverer, someone who's seeking and figuring out what to do and can't quite find it. The recreationalist, that's the person that plays golf every day or takes a once-in-a-lifetime trip every month. The investor, I have a pile of money, and my purpose in life now is going to be making that pile of money bigger. I'm going to spend most of my waking hours thinking about more wealth accumulation. And the philanthropist, and that's I'm on the not-for-profit board, or I am giving away money. None of these are right or wrong. And the truth is most PECs, post-exit entrepreneurs, probably have components of each in them, but try and figure out if any of those archetypes resonate with you and which you gravitate towards and which potentially fit for you or in what proportions.
And I know for myself, it's hard to be honest with yourself. So many times I think I know the answers to those things. And the farther I get down, I realize my motivations weren't as pure as I thought. That kind of selfish self-centeredness in wanting to accomplish or having the accolades of being in that position. So I think that exercise is really important to try to identify how do you vision yourself going forward. And there are some practical realizations. I know I set up a foundation before we exited. Some people think about charitable giving. So it gets into the transition of wealth too. And if you have some ideas about that, there are benefits to identifying that before the actual event for lots of reasons, taxes and otherwise.
Since you mentioned the word wealth, something I figured out in my post-exit was it's not about wealth at all. So many people think post-exit is about managing your wealth, and very quickly you could connect with a lawyer and they'll want to talk to you about this alphabet soup of various trusts and ways to structure and preserve and give and transfer wealth. It just didn't resonate with me. So I don't think it's about wealth. And depending on the size of your exit, if you already have a big pile of wealth and you're not happy, having more will not make you happier. So I think that this whole post-exit journey is figuring out about what's your epilogue. So there's this false narrative that you're happily ever after. You discover you're not. So you need to have an epilogue. The movie and story in entrepreneur land always ends with the exit. But there's an epilogue. Life goes on. And finding your epilogue and figuring out how you create new structure, meaning, and identity is what it's all about. And this is just my opinion. It's rarely focused on wealth. It's really focused on what you do with your time and what gives you joy and fulfillment and satisfaction.
AJ, we could have an endless conversation here as there are so many avenues to go down. And it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. As we begin to wrap things up, and I know Steve is waiting in the wings with our question that we like to ask everyone who comes on as a guest of the podcast. But the one question before that, so many people go through what you went through, but you took it one step further. You sprung into action and you've put this beautiful case note together. I'm wondering, was there a pivotal moment or a seminal moment for you that you said, you know what, I need to take this to the world and share it with my fellow exiters, if there's such a word, who have gone through these liquidity events? What was that for you that had you do this terrific piece of work?
Look, I'm a geeky academic now. And one of the things I love about my role at Yale is I get to think and talk about all these fascinating business topics related to entrepreneurship. And I can't even tell you how much I love my post-exit life now. Being a teacher is truly a gift. What I think is fascinating about this topic, Jeffrey, is that every student I have wants to be an entrepreneur. And they're all chasing this rabbit. And they don't know what it's going to feel like when they catch the rabbit. So I think it's really worthwhile in entrepreneur land to at least introduce to people what it feels like when you get everything you've ever dreamt about. And just being prepared and realizing it might not be everything that you hoped.
AJ, we always ask one question, but you know what? It's going to be an easy question for you for a lot of reasons. One is, I think you've already answered a lot of it. And the other one is, you deal with young students, younger than us anyway, which is about everybody, I should say for me. So here's the question. It's like a back to the future type question. If you could go talk to the 18-year-old or the young AJ, and you've been through your life and you've done your exit, you've done all your things, you've had your family, what advice would you give your young self if you could go back there and tell him something?
I've written a lot about this topic. I've written another case note, which is advice to graduating MBA students. I wrote a book for my kids, What's Next? The Young Adults Roadmap to Life. And that's not a plug at all. I've thought a lot about this, and both those things I just referenced are what advice I would give myself. This sounds so silly, but the game is really about optimizing around happiness. And happiness to me is not short-term sugar high. So eating a hot fudge sundae is not happiness. Having deep, meaningful personal relationships, learning a language, learning how to play an instrument is happiness. And life to me is all about optimizing around happiness. And when you're a hard charging CEO, an entrepreneur, I think you can lose sight of that really quickly. You think the most important thing in the world is building a company or being the best company, the biggest company, or the company worth the most. And it's really all about figuring out how you find happiness in your journey and life. The truth is, I didn't always optimize around that. I sometimes optimized around the wrong things and wish I optimized around the right things. And linking it to the conversation, Stephen, I think if you're optimizing around the right things, when you experience this massive dislocation of a exit, you might be better prepared because there are other components of your life that are vibrant and thriving. And if all your chips are on being an entrepreneur and all of a sudden you're not an entrepreneur, that's hard. But if more of your chips are on being an awesome spouse, an awesome friend, a wonderful dad, and having other interests, not just being an entrepreneur, I think when you exit, it's a smoother and potentially easier transition.
Excellent. Excellent. AJ, if people would like to find you, where would they do that? And we'll publish information in the show notes as well.
If you just Google AJ Wasserstein Yale, you'll get to my bio page at the Yale School of Management, and that's got my email address and everything I've ever written for Yale.
Great.
Which if I can make a self-deprecating joke, I always recommend people read what I write just before they go to sleep. So they'll be guaranteed to get a good night's sleep or learn something, but you're a winner either way.
Listen, we really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you for your wisdom. And I know you're going to be a real gift to our listeners. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Jeffrey.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Totally my pleasure.